The apple did not hit 25-year-old Isaac Newton on the head. Like so many myths ingrained as fact in society and investing, this myth contains a morsel of truth.
He was sitting under an apple tree and he saw an apple fall, and this gave him insight into universal gravitation.
Stephen Snoblin is professor of history and science at the University of King's College in Nova Scotia and a Newton historian. He says what hit Newton was insight.
He thought to himself, might not the force that draws the apple to the earth from the tree be the same force that keeps the moon in orbit around the earth?
Newton saw things no one else can see.
But this complicated equation was not an instantaneous epiphany of the apple aftermath. That's myth. Truth? It took years of gifted but grueling calculation.
We have decades worth of manuscripts in Newton's handwriting, mathematical manuscripts, that show Newton carefully working out his idea of universal gravitation.
Such visionary genius and work ethic was decreed nobility by England. Sir Isaac Newton, knighted for advancing or creating every branch of mathematics, including those stretching into the sciences.
Objects in motion stay in motion.
If you roll a ball down the hill, once it gets down to the bottom of the hill, it stops rolling. Objects obviously don't stay in motion on Earth unless they continue to have energy. So that was very counterintuitive, but yet he saw it.
Force equals mass times acceleration. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
In his three laws of motion, Newton's thinking, certain features of nature are algorithmically compressible. That is to say, they can be reduced to a mathematical formula.
When it comes to human emotions, there is no absolute formula like there is for gravity. There's just no absolute equation to measure it and monitor it.
Humans seem genetically hardwired to connect a clever story with a can't-miss investment. Historians say the South Sea Company created such a story.
A classic case study of a kind of pyramid scheme.
So no one actually thinks they would ever fall for a Ponzi scheme, and yet the biggest Ponzi scheme of all times was Madoff, propping up this massive pyramid of delusion and lies, which of course destroy investors' lives.
Founded in 1711, the South Sea Company of Great Britain is a complex 10-year saga with a familiar refrain involving war, politics, corruption, and greed.
Newton was very skeptical about human nature.
So having a high IQ and the ability to obtain more and more knowledge obviously has its benefits. However, they're limited when it comes to our own human behavior. So no matter how high your IQ is, the cheesecake still looks good.
South Sea Company directors circulate mythical tales to deceive investors. An elixir of riches awaits their ships, which have exclusive rights to travel and trade in the exotic South Seas. Wealth looms for shrewd investors. The scam went the modern-day equivalent of viral. Even Newton was enamored.
Initially, he played his cards very well. The stocks went up, and he pulled out with some very good returns.
But Newton could not outthink that of which he was most suspicious, his human nature.
As an adult, Newton was very, very competitive. He had immense drive.
Newton is sucked into what modern-day behavioral economists call herding bias. And that is, if everybody's doing the same thing at the same time, the human brain, the human mind, discerns that it must be the right thing to do. However, in investing, there is no safety in numbers. And Newton finds that out all too tragically.
Newton reads in London daily newspapers the South Sea Company stock is going up.
Probably thinking about the rates and trying to get his timing right.
We call it market timing and stock picking. Most investors do this regardless of their IQ, and it never feels like speculating and gambling, and anybody can be sucked into it.
It is so uncharacteristic of Newton. Newton was risk averse. He was a very cautious man.
Whatever drove his next decision, it wasn't caution. He takes the plunge, Sir Isaac Newton market times, and bets all his money on one stock.
The South Sea bubble, the South Sea stock crash of the summer of 1720, is probably the first stock market crash ever in history.
At age 78, Sir Isaac Newton is wiped out.
He lost the equivalent of $3 million today. It's a curious thing that a man as brilliant could have miscalculated. It's Newton's physics that sends planetary probes into space, that put men on the moon.
Centuries before the moon landing, Sir Isaac pioneered celestial mechanics.
Because of the mathematical physics that are laid out in his Principia Mathematica, we know that he could calculate the motions of the heavenly bodies.
The solar system he could comprehend. It was earthly mortals that baffled him.
He can't fathom the madness of people who do crazy things, like get involved in stock market bubbles.
Yet Newton himself enters the fray of market madness.
For Newton, ironically, his intellect works against him because he becomes overly optimistic of his abilities to predict the future. Yes, he can predict where a planet might be, even a year in the future, but he can't predict where the market's going to be, even in the next day.
After his crash, Newton lived comfortably through his salary as Master of the Royal Mint, a prestigious governmental position, and his legacy as an intellectual giant was intact. But a private letter emerged that he wrote just 3 years before he died. Clearly, he was haunted by his one big mistake.
I lost very much by the South Sea Company, which makes my pockets empty and my mind averse from dealing in these matters.
Newton is almost miraculously able to calculate and discern the workings of the universe, but unable to discern the inner workings of the human mind when it comes to investing and speculating.